Hello, everyone, and welcome to this edition of the Perspectives in FTD Research webinar series, The Promise of FTD Research Trials, I Know About Current Drug Studies. This webinar is being presented jointly by the Association for Frontotemporal Degeneration and the FTD Disorders Registry. My name is Lakeisha Vincent, and I am the manager of the FTD Disorders Registry. On behalf of everyone here, thank you for joining us. A few housekeeping items before we get started. Please note that our audience will be muted for the duration of the presentation. This helps to keep the background noise to a minimum so that everyone can hear the presenter clearly. If you have any technical issues, please write a message in the question box and we will try to address them. There will be a time for Q&A at the end of the presentation. If you have a question for one of our presenters, type it in the question box when you think of it. You do not need to wait until the end of the presentation to submit your questions. We will answer as many of them as time permits. This webinar will be recorded and archived for later viewing on the AFTD's YouTube page and the FTD Disorders Registry's YouTube page. Speaking of FTD Disorders Registry, I'd like to take a moment to give you more information. The registry is a powerful tool in the movement to discover treatments and a cure for FTD. It relies on stories of people like you, including persons diagnosed with FTD, caregivers, family members, and friends. Your stories and lived experiences will help to spark innovations that could lead to effective treatment and therapies. If FTD has touched your life in some way, I strongly encourage you to join the thousands of people who have already signed up for the registry. Registration allows you to receive periodic news and FTD research updates, as well as notifications to participate in surveys and research studies to help further the science of FTD. Before we begin, I will hand things off to Dr. Shana Dodge of AFTD for a few words.
Hello, everyone. I'm Shana Dodge, and I'm the Director of Research Engagement at the Association for Frontotemporal Degeneration. AFTD is committed to helping the community of people impacted by FTD gain information so they can make educated decisions about whether or not to participate in research. We're so happy you joined us today. I'd like to take this opportunity to talk briefly about AFTD's next education conference, taking place May 5th, 2023 in downtown St. Louis, Missouri. This annual event convenes persons affected by FTD, experts in the field, and other healthcare professionals for a full day of learning and connection. And if you can't make it to St. Louis, you'll be able to watch along online with our free live stream. Registration launches in mid-January. If you want to be notified when registration opens, visit the URL shown on the screen and add your email address. Whether in person or online, we hope to see you there. Turning back to FTD research trials, here's a quick question we'd like you to answer. How hopeful do you feel about the availability of future FTD treatments? I'll give everyone a few seconds to respond. So it looks like the responses are in. 42% of you said you feel 28% somewhat pessimistic, 18% very hopeful, 8% very pessimistic, and 4% don't know or not sure. Thank you to everyone for participating. And now Lakeisha will introduce today's speakers.
Thank you, Shana. Dr. Laura Middick is Chief Scientific Officer for Bluefield Project to Cure FTD. She manages Bluefield's efforts to translate scientific discoveries into therapeutics. She works closely with scientists in the Bluefield Research Consortium to identify and accelerate promising ideas and leads efforts to support the development of biomarkers and clinical endpoints for FTD. She meets regularly with academic and industry scientists to enable collaborative projects and oversee Bluefield's communication strategy. Dr. Diana Wheaton is the Director of FTD Disorders Registry. She managed the registry's daily operations, worked directly with persons diagnosed with FTD and their families, and leads outreach efforts to lay and health professional communities. She also assists clinicians, researchers, and organizations interested in using the registry to answer important research questions and to support clinical trials. Dr. Wheaton is going to start us off today. Welcome, Dr. Wheaton.
Thank you, Lakeisha, and hello, everyone. Over the past few years, the Perspectives in Research series has set out to provide a foundational understanding of research principles to empower informed decision-making for research participation. Some of you attending today have been with us for each of the webinars. Others may be attending for the first time. The January, March, and June webinars, along with their key learning objectives, are shown here. Each of these webinars was created as a standalone item, but are complementary to each other. If you would like to view these recordings, they're available on the AFTD and the registry's YouTube channels. As we approach the close of this calendar year, it's nice to reflect back on some of the advances made in the field of FTD research. November marked the International Society of Frontotemporal Degeneration Conference and several ancillary meetings in which researchers shared their most recent findings. The breadth and volume of data is too comprehensive to share today, but I would like to highlight some key categories of advancement. Researchers presented data on existing and new natural history study cohorts. In addition to the US, Canada, European, and South American cohorts, there are now studies enrolling in Australia, New Zealand, Japan, Korea, China, Southeast Asia, and India. This geographic expansion lays the groundwork to increase the clinical trial network geographically, which is very important for rare diseases. Researchers also presented data on new clinical, cognitive, and imaging measures, new risk genes, and new biomarker candidates. Advances were also described for clinical trial design and disease modeling. Some of the most inspiring information related to the expanding clinical trial pipeline for current and soon to be enrolling interventional studies, which is the focal topic of this webinar today. Together, these advances underscore how much FTD research has evolved over the last few years. In the next few slides, I will provide some key background information, a bit about genetics. Approximately 40% of persons affected with FTD do have a family history that includes at least one other relative diagnosed with a neurodegenerative disease. Their FTD is described as familial. The remaining 60% are described as sporadic. Gene mutations can sometimes be identified as causative of some cases of FTD, and this is true more often for the familial cases. C9orf72, GRN, and MAPT are the most common causes of FTD. If you are concerned whether you may be at genetic risk for FTD, there are several steps you can take. You can get informed about inheritance concepts and basic genetics of FTD. You can gather your family history, who is affected, what symptoms, what age of onset, and how people are related to each other. You can discuss these concerns with a medical health professional. You can seek a referral to a genetic counselor, either through the assistance of your health professional or by directly contacting the National Society of Genetic Counselors search engine. You can attend an initial genetic counseling consultation, which is also known as a pre-test counseling session. This is not a commitment to undergo genetic testing, but rather a fact-finding discussion to determine if genetic testing is right for you. If you determine that you want to proceed with testing, there are several ways to access testing services. Clinician-ordered testing is the most common and traditional pathway, but testing is also available as part of research studies, such as the ALL-FTD study. There are also emerging sponsored, no-cost genetic testing programs. These programs are often sponsored by industry or pharma companies, and there is information about these programs on the AFTD and registry websites. You can visit the AFTD's website and select the genetics page, or the registry's website and select the FTD Resources tab to access the FTD genetics page for an assortment of genetic resources ranging from handouts to webinars. As you will hear later in this webinar, gene-targeted therapies are a key interventional modality, further elevating the importance of education about this issue. Clinical studies can take several forms. Observational studies do not test new treatments or drugs, but rather observe participants. The ALL-FTD and GenFI studies are examples of natural history studies. Let's contrast clinical trials, which is our focus today. In these studies, often known as interventional trials, treatment trials, or experimental trials, the goal is to test new ways to prevent, detect, or treat disease by using new drugs, surgical procedures, or repurposing existing treatments. Clinical trials are implemented in a phased process, starting with phase 1, in which a drug is tested on a small number of people. The goal of this phase is to determine safety, side effects, and correct dosage. If the results from phase 1 are promising, we move to phase 2, in which a drug is tested on a larger number of people with a certain disease. In this case, the goal is to obtain preliminary data on whether the drug is effective while continuing to monitor safety. If the results of phase 2 are promising, next we move to phase 3, in which a study is tested on an even larger number of people. In this case, the goal is to obtain conclusive data on whether the drug is effective while continuing to monitor safety. If the results from phase 3 are indeed promising, the data is presented to the FDA and the drug may be approved for use. Participation in clinical trials takes careful consideration. It is important to read the study description and any supporting materials carefully. For any study, there may be risks and benefits. Risks may include a treatment that is uncomfortable or has side effects. The treatment may not work, or you may receive placebo rather than the treatment. Participation may be inconvenient. Benefits may include early access to a new treatment, knowledge that you're playing a proactive role in your healthcare, or more frequent health checkups. Your participation may help in the development of new or better treatments. When contemplating participation in a clinical trial, you should also be prepared to ask lots of questions and discuss the study with your family and healthcare professional. Here are a list of questions to help get you started. While too lengthy to go through in detail, these questions cover topics of enrollment criteria, such as what criteria must I meet to be enrolled? The study logistics, where is the closest clinical site? And the experimental trial design, such as what procedures or tests am I required to do as part of the study? As well as questions about impact to medical care, such as do I have to stop taking my current medications? Costs, will travel be covered? And what happens after the study ends, such as will you tell me the results? One final word, not everyone can participate in a clinical trial. Whether the barrier is the eligibility criteria, the logistics, or that the current study may be too mentally or physically difficult, there are ways to participate with fewer barriers or even share your voice to help guide person-centered outcomes. Thank you for the opportunity to share this information, and I hope you find it helpful.
Thank you, Dr. Wheaton. At this time, we will present a recorded presentation from Laura Middick of the Bluefield Project to Cure FTD. Dr. Mick will join us live after the presentation for a brief question and answer session.
Hi, my name is Laura Middick, and I'm the Chief Scientific Officer for the Bluefield Project to Cure Frontotemporal Dementia. I'm pleased to provide this webinar today entitled The Promise of FTD Research Trials, What Should I Know About Current Drug Studies? The Bluefield Project is a nonprofit organization based in San Francisco with a mission to develop a cure for FTD, particularly FTD caused by mutations in progranulin. Our organization was founded in 2008. I joined in 2009, and I can say that the progress that we've seen in this field over the last 13 years has really been extraordinary. Building on a pipeline of robust discoveries by basic scientists around the world, companies are now developing and testing precisely targeted approaches for genetic forms of FTD, which I will describe today. I will also detail some treatment trials for sporadic, non-genetic forms of FTD. These treatment trials would not be possible without the participation of many, many FTD patients, at-risk family members, caregivers, and study partners in observational studies over many years. The importance of participating in research studies, both observational and treatment, cannot be overstated, but it is a significant commitment. And so as I begin today, I'd like to acknowledge and thank the many volunteers that have been involved in these studies, past and present, and have contributed to and continue to contribute to these advances. Dr. Wheaton just provided an introduction to clinical trials and what to consider when thinking about enrolling in a clinical trial. So I'm going to jump right in now and discuss the current interventional trials in genetic and sporadic FTD. I am a basic scientist by training. I'm not an MD, so I can't provide medical advice, but I will describe trials that are actively recruiting, and I'll provide details about how to enroll. This recording will be available on the registry website at a later date, so you can review the details. Today, I will cover interventional trials for FTD caused by mutations in the progranulin gene, FTD caused by expansions in the C9 open reading frame 72 gene, and FTD caused sporadically or without a known genetic cause. The trials that I've listed here today were selected to meet a few criteria. They are all actively recruiting participants right now, with one exception, but it will open enrollment shortly, so I have included it on these slides. All of these trials have trial sites that are in the United States, either now or they will be in the near future. They may also have trial sites open around the world. So these trials are not limited to the United States, but for the purposes of the talk today, I selected trials that are currently or soon will be available in the United States. And lastly, all of these trials are testing a chemical or a biological experimental intervention. There are other trials testing procedures such as transcranial stimulation that I will not review today. So all of these trials require taking a pill or receiving an injection or an infusion of an experimental treatment. In order to try to simplify the presentation of information today, I will describe each trial using the same template. And my goal is for viewers to be aware of treatment trials that may be relevant to them. And then if you're interested in possibly participating, to have information that you can take to your physician or your loved one's physician to open a discussion about participating in a treatment trial. So first, I'll describe the components of this template. At the top, the sponsor is listed. The sponsor is the entity that is running the treatment trial. They have obtained the funding for the trial, they have made or acquired the experimental drug, and they are responsible for complying with all applicable FDA regulations, such as safety or trial design. And in the trials that I'll describe today, the sponsor is either a company or an investigator at an academic institution. The development stage refers to what phase, either 1, 2, or 3 in the process for FDA approval that a company is testing in. And as Dr. Wheaton described, phase 1 is at the beginning of the process and phase 3 is late in the process. And in this line, I'll also, if the trial has a formal name, I will also provide the formal name for the trial. Next, the ClinicalTrialsgov identifier. That's the number that is assigned to a study on the government website, www.clinicaltrials.gov. And this can be a useful number, so I'd like to share a little more information about how to use it. So www.clinicaltrials.gov is a searchable database of clinical studies conducted in the US and around the world. And if you're interested in seeing what treatment trials might be available for any disease, FTD, cancer, any disease, as well as actually observational studies too, you can search for them in this database. So in the fields, you can enter things such as the name of the disease, like FTD or PPA. One can enter the name of a gene that might be associated with the disease, such as progranulin, or the abbreviation GRN. Other gene names, such as C9orf72. It's quite flexible and quite broad what you can search with. It accepts a whole lot of different search terms. Additionally, you can enter things like the clinical trial number, which I'll provide on each of these slides for the trials, or the larger name for the trial, such as Proclaim or Focus C9, or also the drug name, such as AL001 or DNL593. So these are all examples of what to enter. And if you play around with it and search, you'll see that it's quite an easy website to use. However, the information that the website provides is often quite technical. It's provided by the sponsors, and it's not necessarily straightforward to understand. However, this is a central resource where you can get a sense of opportunities, and you can use this information to ask your doctor for additional information, or you can call the contact info. Each trial will have at the very end a contact number for the sponsor of the trial, or even an email, and you can use that information to get in touch and learn more. Many of these studies are also highlighted at the FTD Disorders Registry, and there you'll find easier explanations about these trials. So next on the template are enrollment criteria. So trials often have many detailed restrictions. These are called inclusion and exclusion criteria, and they're specific to each trial, and they determine whether one can participate. So these criteria may include specifics about the diagnosis and where in the disease trajectory an individual might be. So on this template today, I've just listed the key aspects of the type of FTD that's being evaluated as part of the trial. But if you or your loved one is interested in participating in a trial, the sponsor in the trial site will work closely with you to determine if you're eligible to participate in the trial. The experimental drug refers to the name that the company uses to describe the experimental treatment that they are testing. The delivery method will describe how the experimental drug will be administered to the participant, for example, by mouth, as a tablet or a pill, or by injection, or by infusion. Placebo-controlled describes whether some participants will receive a placebo instead of the experimental drug. So a placebo is a sham substance, like a sugar pill. It should not have any therapeutic benefit, and placebos are very important because they help determine whether changes in the test group occurred by chance or because of the experimental drug. The length of the trial describes how long participants will be monitored. So in some cases, in the trials describing today, there will be an active part of the trial where participants will go into the clinic to be evaluated or provide biospecimens regularly, and then followed by a longer period called a passive monitoring component with less frequent evaluations. And this you'll see in the gene therapy trials that I'll describe. So it's important to note to really understand what the involvement is when one signs up for a trial, how long that will be, and what that will entail. Locations refers to the countries where clinical trial sites are planned or actively recruiting participants. And for anyone who might be watching from a location where there is not a clinical trial site, I think it's always worth it's always worth advocating or discussing whether there might be an opportunity to open a site closer to you if you are interested in participating. And that's something that you can discuss with the company as sponsor, or even with the doctor who might be able to reach out to the company. And then lastly, I've provided contact info as listed on the clinicaltrials.gov website. In each template on the right, there's an explanation of how the experimental drug is believed to target the processes that have led to FTD. There's often lots and lots of history and basic science and translational science that goes into developing these drugs. So this is just a quick overview on the right of how the drug targets or is believed to provide a therapeutic benefit. So today I will describe 4 trials that are currently underway in FTD caused by mutations in progranulin. All of these trials require participants to know that they carry a mutation in progranulin in order to enroll. And as Dr. Wheaton talked about earlier, information about genetic testing opportunities can be found on the registry website. So I will discuss INFRONT-3, a phase 3 trial underway by Elector and GlaxoSmithKline, PROCLAIM, a phase 1/2 trial underway by Prevail and Eli Lilly, Uplifted, a phase 1/2 trial underway by Passage Bio, a trial underway, a phase 1/2 trial underway by Denali Therapeutics and Takeda. And then lastly, I've included an upcoming trial that is not yet recruiting. It's a trial of ABB101 by Aviato Bio, but it is expected to start in the near future. I don't have an additional slide on it today, but since it is not yet posted on ClinicalTrialsgov, but I did want to make you aware of it. So mutations in the progranulin gene result in less progranulin protein being made, and that leads to FTD in adulthood. So all of these approaches attempt to treat FTD by increasing progranulin levels, either via an antibody or by replacing the protein gene or the progranulin gene or the protein directly. This slide graphically illustrates the phase that each trial is currently in. So Elector and GSK's trial, UPFRONT-3, is currently in phase 3. Prevail's trial, PROCLAIM, is in phase 1/2. Uplifted is in phase 1/2, and Denali's trial is in phase 1/2. Some of these companies have partnered these programs for development purposes with larger biopharmers, such as Elector with GlaxoSmithKline or Denali with Takeda, or the company may have been acquired, such as Prevail, which is a subsidiary of Eli Lilly. So today you'll hear me mostly refer to these trials by the name of the originating company, but I wanted to explain why there are multiple company logos for many of these programs. So a question one might have in looking at these options is, after listening to this presentation, if I'm eligible for several trials, how do I choose? And I can't answer that, but my recommendation would be for you to discuss that question with your physician. And so together you can prioritize trials based on your own medical history and the specific details of each trial. So first, we'll review Elector Therapeutics INFRONT-3 trial. This is a phase 3 trial. I've listed the ClinicalTrialsgov identifier and the enrollment criteria. As mentioned earlier, one must know that they are progranulin mutation carrier in order to enroll. This trial does have both an asymptomatic and a symptomatic arm. So individuals who are asymptomatic are known progranulin mutation carriers but do not have any symptoms can enroll in this. They must meet additional enrollment criteria. Similarly, symptomatic individuals must also meet additional enrollment criteria. The experimental drug is called AL001 with a trade name of latozinemab. And the delivery method for this drug is intravenous or IV, that means injected into the bloodstream, usually in the arm, the leg, it's the wrist. It's an intravenous infusion every 4 weeks. It is a placebo-controlled trial, and this trial can last up to 96 weeks. It does have the option for an open label extension after the trial, after your participation in the trial ends. So for example, whether you're in the placebo arm or the treatment trial arm, you would have the opportunity, if you would like, to continue with the drug after your participation in the experimental part of the trial is concluded. This trial has the largest number of sites available in the FTD community right now. There are 54 sites around the world in the US, Canada, Australia, Argentina, Europe, and Western Asia, many countries in Europe. The contact information is listed at the bottom here as found on ClinicalTrialsgov, and a brief description on the right of how this drug works. It increases progranulin levels, which is the goal. We want to increase the level of progranulin since progranulin mutations cause a decrease in progranulin levels. This drug increases progranulin levels by blocking progranulin degradation. So as illustrated here on the left, progranulin is degraded in cells as part of its life cycle. And this experimental drug increases the half-life of progranulin by blocking sortilin, which is a receptor that degrades it in order to restore normal progranulin levels. There's a lot of information on Elector's website and corporate presentations that they've given, and some of the phase 1 and phase 2 trials that preceded this phase 3 trial that is worth looking at if you're interested in learning more about Elector's phase 3 trial. Next, Prevail Therapeutics. This is a phase 1/2 trial called Proclaim. I've listed the ClinicalTrialsgov identifier. Again, one must be a known progranulin mutation carrier, and one must be symptomatic with a clinical diagnosis of frontotemporal dementia. The drug is called PRO06, and this drug is injected. It's a single injection into a region of the brain called the intracisterna magna injection, which is illustrated here on the right. It's a fluid-filled area at the base of the brain, and this is not a placebo-controlled trial. This is a gene therapy trial, and the gene therapy trials in the phase 1/2 are not placebo-controlled. So one participating in this trial will receive the experimental drug PRO06. The trial is 12 months of active monitoring plus a 4-year long-term follow-up for a 5-year total participation time. There are 7 sites currently open across the world in the United States, Australia, Belgium, Spain, and the United Kingdom. And contact information is provided at the bottom. And again, the idea for the Prevail trial is that this is a gene replacement trial. So progranulin PRO06 is a experimental drug that increases progranulin levels by delivering a healthy progranulin gene into the brain. And that is illustrated here with the result of increasing progranulin levels. There's additional information on the Prevail Therapeutics website. Next, Passage Bio. They are operating a phase 1/2 clinical trial called Uplifted. This ClinicalTrialsgov identifier is listed here. For this trial, one must know that they have a progranulin mutation, they must be a known carrier, and they must be symptomatic with a clinical diagnosis of FTD. The name of the drug is PBFT02, and it is also injected into the intracisterna magna. It's a single injection. This is also a gene therapy trial, there is no placebo, and the length of the trial is 24 months of active monitoring plus a 4-year long-term follow-up for 5 years total. There are 9 sites open across the world in the United States, Canada, Brazil, Italy, Portugal, and the United Kingdom. Contact information is listed below. And again, the way PBFT02 is proposed to work is it increases progranulin levels by delivering a healthy progranulin gene into the brain. That's illustrated here. There's additional information on Passage's website and in their corporate presentations. Lastly, in the progranulin group, there's a phase 1/2 trial underway by Denali Therapeutics. Here is the ClinicalTrialsgov identifier. One must be a known progranulin mutation carrier and have a clinical diagnosis of FTD to participate. The delivery method is intravenous infusion. It does have a placebo. And the length of the trial is 6 months with an optional 18-month open label extension. Right now, there are 4 sites open in Spain, and there are more to be added. There are no sites open in the US currently, but that is expected to change in the near future. So if you're interested in this trial, some contact information is listed in email below. Now, Denali 593, also known as TAC 594, increases progranulin levels by delivering the progranulin protein across the blood-brain barrier. And that's illustrated here. There are also publications by Denali that can be found actually on their website that explain the method of action. In this case, recombinant progranulin is connected or fused to a molecule which helps transport it into the brain. So this is injected into the blood and then transported across the brain via what they call a transport vesicle to increase progranulin levels in the brain. And again, I refer you to Denali's website for additional information about the mechanism. So next, I will discuss current clinical trials for FTD and ALS caused by expansions in C9 open reading frame 72. So both of these trials require participants to know that they carry a C9 open reading frame 72 expansion in order to enroll. There are two trials, one Focus C9 by Wave Life Sciences, which is testing an antisense oligonucleotide, another phase 2 trial by Transposon Therapeutics, which is testing a small molecule. There were a couple of trials enrolling that I've just mentioned here for those who are familiar with them that we're enrolling for C9 mutation carriers, and those are no longer recruiting right now. So I will just be discussing these top two trials today. So first, Wave Life Sciences is running a trial, a phase 1/2 trial called Focus C9. The ClinicalTrialsgov identifier is listed here. In order to enroll in this trial, one must be a C9 open reading frame 72 expansion carrier, and one must be symptomatic, diagnosed with FTD, or diagnosed with ALS, or diagnosed with a mixed phenotype of both FTD and ALS. The experimental drug is called WVE-004, and it is an intrathecal. That's an injection into essentially the spinal column every 4 weeks. This is a placebo-controlled trial, and the length of the trial is 24 weeks. There are 17 sites open around the world in Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and many countries in Europe. There are no sites open yet in the US, but Wave does intend to open US sites, so I've included that here on in our talk today. Additional contact information for Wave, as listed on ClinicalTrialsgov, is at the bottom. Now, the experimental drug WVE-004 is an antisense oligonucleotide, and its mechanism of action is to selectively block the mutant C9orf72 gene from making harmful proteins. So this is a precisely targeted antisense oligonucleotide, which lowers the destructive proteins that can be formed from the hexanucleotide repeats, and indeed it preserves the expression of the healthy copy of C9orf72 to reduce the toxic gain of function drivers of disease. So I refer you again to Wave Life Sciences website for additional information as well. Next, Transposon Therapeutics is running a phase 2 trial. The ClinicalTrialsgov identifier is listed here, and the enrollment criterion for this trial is one must carry a hexanucleotide repeat expansion in C9, also be diagnosed with FTD, or diagnosed with ALS, or diagnosed with a mixed phenotype of FTD and ALS. The experimental drug by Transposon Therapeutics is called TPN-101. This is a capsule taken once daily by mouth. It does have a placebo control component in the arm, so participants may receive placebo or experimental drug. And this trial is 24 weeks long with the opportunity for 24-week open label extension, which again means that after, regardless of whether one has participated in the placebo or experimental component in the first 24 weeks, all participants have the opportunity to continue to receive the experimental drug for an additional 24 weeks. There are 19 sites currently open in the United States and Europe, and contact information as listed on ClinicalTrialsgov is available at the bottom of this slide. So TPN 101 is believed to have a therapeutic effect by blocking the disease-causing production of the line-1 gene. And what that means is that in FTD and ALS caused by C9 expansions, there is a loss of a protein called TDP43 from the nucleus. And that loss is believed to lead to harmful expression of another gene. And so there's preclinical evidence that shows that blocking that harmful expression may mitigate some of the neurotoxic pathology associated with TDP43 loss from the nucleus. So to learn more, I would refer you to a really great webinar from May 6, 2022 from the NEALS website called A Phase 2A Study of TPN 101 in Patients with C9 Open Reading Frame 72 ALS or FTD, and also to the company website. There are currently no treatment trials that are specifically for FTD caused by mutations in tau, but efforts for future trials are in development. So I've covered so far trials for progranulin mutation carriers, trials for C9 open reading frame 72 expansion carriers. There are no trials specifically for mutations in tau right now in MAPT, but there's very active efforts underway in the community to develop some. So lastly, I will, and I'm getting right to the end of time here, I will cover current clinical trials for sporadic or non-genetic forms of FTD. So there's a trial enrolling now for PSP, for semantic dementia, FTD, and then BVFTD or semantic variant PPA or non-fluent variant PPA with behavior. And I will discuss all of these. So first, a phase 1 trial by Novartis for PSP. The ClinicalTrialsgov identifier is located here. Individuals who are interested in participating in this trial must have PSP and be diagnosed for less than 5 years with a current classification of probable PSP Richardson syndrome, as well as specific scores on a couple of rating scales. So again, this is an area where your physician and the sponsor will work to make sure that an individual is eligible to participate in this trial. The experimental drug is called NIO-752. It is an antisense oligonucleotide, and this is an intrathecal infusion into the spinal column 4 times over 3 months. It is placebo-controlled. It's a 12-month-long trial, and right now there are 12 sites open in the US, Canada, Germany, and the United Kingdom. There's contact information listed here at the bottom. And the mechanism of action in this phase 1 trial, NIO-752, it is an antisense oligonucleotide, which reduces the production of tau protein. Next, a trial underway at the University of California, San Francisco. The lead investigator is Peter Lebenkov. This is a phase 1 trial. The trial is ClinicalTrialsgov identifiers listed. This is for individuals who are diagnosed with semantic dementia. And the name of the experimental drug is verdipostat. This is a drug that is taken by tablet twice daily by mouth. There is a placebo-controlled arm in this trial. The trial is 24 weeks long. Currently, there is 1 site open at the University of California, San Francisco, but there are additional sites which will be opening in the United States shortly, and contact information is listed below. So individuals that have semantic dementia, this drug is believed to irreversibly inhibit another protein, the result of which will reduce neuroinflammation. And this is shown here from a patient who was treated, patient 1, before drug. The brighter colors indicate inflammation. And after treatment for 4 and 8 weeks, the colors get darker, which means that inflammation has decreased in this case. And so I've referenced a study here, and I'd encourage those who are interested also to call the contact information to learn more about this trial. Next, there is a phase 2 trial underway. The sponsor is Lawson Health Research Institute. This trial is led by Dr. Elizabeth Finger. The clinical trials government identifier is here. Individuals must be diagnosed by FTD. The drug is oxytocin with a trade name of syntocinon, and this is an intranasal spray. It's placebo-controlled, and the trial is 20 weeks long. There are 11 sites in Canada and the United States, and contacts are listed on ClinicalTrialsgov, or this trial is also explained on the registry website. And oxytocin increases neuronal activity in the brain areas associated with emotions and empathy. And so this trial is testing whether oxytocin helps to improve some of the symptoms that are associated with FTD. Lastly, there's a trial underway at Columbia University led by Dr. Ted Huey. This is a phase 2 trial. This is in individuals that are diagnosed with behavioral variant FTD or semantic variant PPA or non-fluent variant PPA with behavior. Just at time here. This is a test of low dose lithium. It's a tablet taken 1 to 4 times daily, depending on the dose that one is assigned. It is placebo controlled, 12 weeks long, 1 site at Columbia, and contact information is given. And again, lithium will be compared to placebo for the treatment of symptoms associated with behavioral variant FTD, including agitation, aggression, and inappropriate behaviors. So lastly, I'd like to encourage you to stay informed about clinical research via the FTD Disorders Registry. These studies are described on the registry website in more detail, and this is a great place to enroll in email updates as well to stay abreast of all of the really exciting opportunities that are underway for hopefully curing FTD. I'd like to thank you for your participation and for joining us today. Please feel free to contact me. That's my email address. And I'd like to thank my colleagues at the Bluefield Project, the FTD Disorders Registry, and my colleagues at the Association for FTD for today's webinar. Thank you.
Dr. Middick and Dr. Wheaton have now joined us for a brief Q&A session, and we will try to answer as many questions as we can during the remaining time. First question is, how is my privacy protected during these trials?
Hi, I can try to answer that. I think that's a great question, and that's one that you'll want to talk with the sponsors directly about. But I can assure you that there will be a process where you will review exactly how your privacy will be protected. That is outlined in the informed consent that you'll have an opportunity to review before you agree to participate in the trial. And I think that's something definitely you want to make sure that you understand and are comfortable with before you participate in the trial. It's a great question.
Thank you. The next question, there aren't any clinical trials for me right now. How do I stay informed about when a trial is enrolling?
Well, I'll take that question. One great way to stay informed is to actually track some of those resources that have been described. So you can follow ClinicalTrialsgov and periodically search there. You can also follow the FTD Disorders Registry's Find a Study page for new studies to be listed. And you can enroll, if you wish, in the FTD Disorders Registry and participate in a manner in which we will send targeted study notices when you meet certain eligibility criteria, and we will bring studies to your attention to which you might qualify for.
Thank you, Dr. Wheaton. Next question, how quickly are scientists learning about whether or not progranulin is the singular problem in GRN FTD? I've heard that GRN is simpler to solve since it's a straightforward problem, loss of function. But are there more aspects to this issue?
Another great question. So yes, there is very active research underway to understand progranulin function in the brain and in the rest of the body too, and why mutations in progranulin, which result in the loss of progranulin, cause FTD. So it is one of the reasons why there's so much commercial interest in developing therapeutics for FTD caused by mutations in progranulin, because it's believed that the disease-causing mechanism is quite straightforward. So loss of progranulin causes disease, therefore replacing progranulin should fix the disease. There is active effort to understand what progranulin does, and maybe in the future there might be opportunities for therapeutic intervention once we understand that, but the hope really is that just by replacing progranulin there should be a profound impact.
Will there be trials for other genes like MAPT?
Yes, there have been in the past trials for MAPT, and there will be in the future. I think that there is an effort underway right now there are potentially promising therapeutics, and there's an effort underway to organize that. It takes money and time, and I think that's the issue. But I would encourage those not to give up hope. I think that hopefully in the next year or two, we should definitely see some additional trials opening for individuals that carry tau mutations.
How do I find out if I have the genes that you're talking about?
Okay, well, I'll take that one to start with. And if Laura wants to add on at the end, she can do so as well. But the first order of business is to talk to your healthcare professional and bring it to their attention that you are interested and concerned about whether you're carrying a gene that causes FTD and how they would recommend for you to access testing. There are other resources that you can tap into independently of that healthcare provider. You can reach out directly through the National Society of Genetic Counselors and identify a genetic counselor in your area and arrange a consultation to just have a very open discussion about the likelihood of your risk and whether genetic testing is appropriate to you. And they can help you walk through those steps of decision making. And then if you're really convinced that you're wanting to move forward, you can access genetic testing through one of those sponsored no-cost genetic testing programs that are now available. So you do have resources, and I encourage you to have a heartfelt conversation first with your healthcare provider and consider next steps from there.
Laura, do you have anything you want to add?
Well, sure. And of course, the number one reason that you might think there is an FTD causing gene in your family is that you have a family history of that gene. And or that you have a family history of FTD. But I would also just comment that as there's been so much progress in understanding and diagnosing FTD, that there are many times we hear many times of families where individuals have family members that were diagnosed with other diseases, but they weren't FTD, such as Alzheimer's or just sort of general dementia, things like that. And I think that should definitely raise a flag that it might be something to talk to about with your physician, that you have a family history, even though it's not a family history exactly of FTD. And part of that is just because doctors weren't aware of and diagnosing FTD, 40 or 50 years ago, 30 years ago. So that would be one thing to comment. And then also just that it does, unfortunately, mutations do arise spontaneously. So there are individuals that don't have a family history of frontotemporal dementia, but may carry mutations in these genes. And so that's something to consider as well.
Okay, so that will wrap up the Q&A session. Thank you, Dr. Middick and Dr. Wheaton, for joining us today. Before we go, I'd like to revisit our question from earlier. Given what you've heard today, how hopeful do you feel about the availability of future FTD treatments? And I'll give everyone a few seconds to respond. Okay, we have the results, and 26% say you're very hopeful. 53% say you're somewhat hopeful. 12% is somewhat pessimistic. 7% is very pessimistic, and 2% is not sure. Thank you for your responses. So we've reached the end of today's webinar. We hope you found it to be informative. As a reminder, this webinar has been recorded. You will be able to find it on the AFTD and the FTD Disorders Registry's website and YouTube channels in the coming days, along with the link to download the slide deck. Thanks again for joining us. If you have any further questions about FTD, you can contact the AFTD helpline at 866-507-7222 or by emailing info@theaftd.org. And be sure to sign up for the FTD Disorders Registry if you haven't already. Visit ftdregistry.org to learn more. Thank you.